You lock the front door. You pull the handle once. Locked. So you turn around and start walking. 3 steps. Maybe 5. Then something happens. You stop. You look back at the door. For a second, you can't explain why. You know you locked it. You remember your hand turning the key. You remember hearing the little click. And yet your brain quietly asks, did I actually lock it? So you walk back. You grab the handle. Nothing. Locked. You stand there for another second, almost annoyed at yourself. Then you walk away. And sometimes, just before you reach the car, you look back one more time. Not because you think the door suddenly unlocked itself. Not because you genuinely believe someone is standing behind it. You just want to be completely sure. And that's the strange part. Because if you already knew the answer, why did you need to ask the question again? You probably do this with more things than you realize. You check the stove after you've already checked it. You check your phone because you thought you heard a notification, even though the screen is silent. You look at a message you just sent and read it again, not because you don't know what you wrote, but because you just want to make sure. You set your alarm, then check the alarm, and 5 minutes later, check it again. You lock your car, walk away, and then press the handle just to feel the confirmation. These moments are so small that most of us never think about them. They're almost invisible, but they reveal something surprisingly deep about the way the human brain works. Because sometimes the problem isn't that you don't know what happened. The problem is that you don't completely trust your memory of what happened. And those are two very different things. Imagine locking your door while thinking about something else. Maybe you're already late. Maybe you're thinking about an email you need to answer. Maybe you're replaying something someone said to you earlier. Your hand locks the door almost automatically. Your body knows the routine. You've done it hundreds, maybe thousands of times. But later, when you try to remember the exact moment, there's almost nothing there. You remember leaving. You remember the door. You remember walking away. But the actual locking feels blurry. And that creates a strange little gap. Your brain doesn't say, the door is definitely unlocked. It says something much more uncomfortable. I don't know. That uncertainty is enough. Because the brain is constantly trying to detect things that could matter. A strange sound, a movement in the corner of your vision, a smell of gas, a missed call, a message that sounds slightly different from usual. The brain is built to notice possible problems before it knows whether those problems are real. That system is incredibly useful. If you were walking through a forest and heard a branch snap behind you, you wouldn't want your brain to calmly say, let's wait for more evidence. You'd want it to pay attention. The problem is that modern life gives this ancient system an almost endless supply of tiny uncertainties. Did I lock the door? Did I turn off the stove? Did I send that email? Did I attach the file? Did I say something stupid? Did they sound annoyed? Did I forget something? Nothing terrible has happened. But your brain doesn't always need a disaster to activate. Sometimes uncertainty itself is enough. And checking feels like a solution. You go back to the door. You touch the handle. Locked. Immediately, something changes. The uncertainty drops. For a moment, your brain relaxes. That's important. Because the checking didn't just give you information. It gave you relief. And relief can teach the brain something. The brain starts learning that when uncertainty feels uncomfortable, checking makes that discomfort go away. So the next time uncertainty appears, checking becomes an obvious move. Not because you're irrational. Not because you're incapable of trusting yourself. Because your brain has learned a very simple association. Uncertainty feels bad, checking feels better. And the relief doesn't necessarily last. You check the door. You're certain. For a few minutes. Then another thought appears. What if I didn't really check it properly? And now the brain wants another confirmation. This is where the ordinary habit becomes psychologically interesting. Because certainty is something the brain keeps reaching for, even though complete certainty is impossible. You can never actually prove everything. You can only become sufficiently confident. The door is locked. The stove is off. The message was sent. The alarm is set. The car is locked. At some point, you have to stop checking and accept that you have enough evidence. But the human brain doesn't always have a clear internal signal that says, enough. And familiar actions make this even stranger. when you do something automatically, you may remember the result less clearly than when you deliberately pay attention. Think about driving a familiar route. You can arrive home and suddenly realize you barely remember the last 10 minutes. You were there. You drove the car. You stopped at the lights. You turned at the right streets. But your conscious memory didn't record every second. The same thing can happen with ordinary routines. You lock the door while your attention is somewhere else. You turn off the stove while thinking about dinner tomorrow. You put your phone down while thinking about an argument. The action happened, but because nothing unusual happened during it, your brain didn't give a moment a bright mental label. Later, when you try to retrieve it, there's less detail. And that lack of detail can feel like evidence that you might have made a mistake, even though it isn't. This is one reason checking can become so strange. The more ordinary the action, the less memorable it may be. And the less memorable it feels, the more tempting it becomes to check. But there is a deeper twist here. Sometimes you're not actually checking the door. You're checking your own feeling of certainty. You want to feel completely sure. You want that little internal sensation of, yes, absolutely, I know. And that's something the brain can't reliably provide on demand. Because feelings of certainty are not the same thing as facts. You can be correct and still feel uncertain. You can be wrong and feel completely confident. Your brain doesn't come with a perfect certainty meter. This matters far beyond doors. You send a message and reread it because you want certainty that it didn't sound rude. You make a decision and keep thinking about it because you want certainty that there wasn't a better option. You finish a conversation and replay it because you want certainty that you didn't say the wrong thing. You submit something at work and check it again because you want certainty that you didn't miss anything. You ask someone, "Are we okay?" Not necessarily because you have evidence that something is wrong. Sometimes you just want the uncertainty to disappear. And that's when a tiny behavior like checking a door starts revealing something much bigger about being human. We don't only check things because they're dangerous. We check because not knowing is uncomfortable. And the modern world gives us endless opportunities to not know. Unread messages, delayed replies, notifications, ambiguous conversations, important decisions, uncertain relationships, jobs where one small mistake feels enormous. There's always another possibility, another what if, another thing you could verify. And technology has made verification incredibly easy. You can check the message, check the tracking number, check the calendar, check the weather, check your bank account, check whether someone has seen your text, check again. The tools are convenient, but convenience can quietly turn uncertainty into something we feel obligated to eliminate. So what do you actually do when you catch yourself checking something you've already checked? Probably not what your anxious brain wants you to do. You don't need to make a dramatic rule. You don't need to convince yourself that nothing could ever go wrong. You simply begin noticing the difference between needing information and wanting reassurance. If the stove might genuinely be on, check it. If you don't remember locking the door because you were distracted, checking once makes sense. But if you've checked, found the answer, and the only thing left is the uncomfortable feeling that you aren't certain enough, that is a different problem. The temptation is to check again until the feeling disappears. But sometimes the more useful thing is to notice the feeling without immediately obeying it. Not because the feeling is meaningless, but because you don't need to turn every uncomfortable uncertainty into another investigation. Eventually, you have to leave the house. You lock the door. You pull the handle. You know it's locked. And then you walk away. The strange thing is, the door was never really the problem. The door was just where you happen to notice it. Because underneath that tiny moment is a much older human struggle. The desire to know, the desire to control, the desire to be certain that everything is okay. But life never gives us that final confirmation. There will always be one more possibility, one more question, one more thing you could check. And sometimes growing comfortable with life means learning to walk away from the locked door without looking back. Not because you're completely certain, but because you're certain enough.